The Rise of Fascism and Beginnings of the Cold War by Anuja Jayachandran and Niku Tabatabai. Starting with The Rise of Fascism is a political cartoon of the relationship between the Nazi people and those that were thought as inferior, such as the Jews. This shows that the Nazis didn't mind killing people through the means of poison gas, even though the only difference was their physical appearance. What is fascism? Fascism was a new political ideology or mass movement in the early 1900s. It was driven by the nationalism to manage the people of the country to be prepared for any endeavor that the leader commands them to do. It was said that it cleanses the nation to have a common goal which is given by fascist leaders. Fascist leaders believe that the strength of a nation is more vital than the well-being of the people. Training was given to increase military power to start a new life in Italy and Germany. Due to the youth and adolescents, the fascist leaders had used them to expand the military from their strength and sacrifice. Fascism opposed communism because communism was the idea of a classless and stateless nation that valued equality amongst all people, while fascists believed that an economic hierarchy was necessary for society as a whole to function. A bundle of rods strapped together around an axe called fasces was used as punishment to display power in ancient Rome. Often using violence, they ruled as dictators or rulers with ultimate power. Causes of fascism. Fascism came into effect after nationalism views were developed in an increasingly secular modern world, causing the loss of traditional social systems. Extreme militaristic nationalism was a cause of fascism due to intense patriotic values to ensure that the nation is destined for greatness. Democracy and liberalism was shown as irrelevant in the fascist society because it was failure to depend on the people and instead the leader can make more efficient rules. For example, Hitler in Germany, Primo de Rivera in Spain, and Tojo dictatorship in Japan proved that the only effect of democracy and liberalism was human failure. Fascism ideas surrounded the fact that the leaders have the most power to make decisions, and this is due to status and class, which differs from communism. In a fascist society, individualism was not allowed to keep peace for the nation to prosper. Effects of fascism. One major effect of fascism was the Holocaust because it was a mass genocide practicing anti-Semitism or against the Jews. They even went to the extent of building death camps which killed Jewish people by either poison gas, starvation, or disease. Neo-fascism emerged after fascism died in around 1945. It was basically the same as fascism, but was more lenient in rule due to the changing times, accepting democracy and liberal ideas. Also, traditional values were kept intact because, for example, the gender roles were back where the women had to stay home to take care of the children while the men were outside the home to earn for the family. Here are some pictures, and in picture 1 on the left is of the fascist used in ancient Rome. It was the weapon used to execute criminals and simultaneously display the supreme power of the fascist leader. In picture 2 on the right is of the fascist military, which was treated very well because it was the foundation to their success. It is said that they had extreme courage and strength, causing the fascist leaders such as Hitler and Mussolini to have as a backbone to conquer lands and create nationalism. Key events. Due to World War I, economic issues arose, calling the fascist leaders to power, promising power and glory to civilians. While Benito Mussolini took over Italy and Adolf Hitler took over Nazi Germany, their armies were extremely strong, taking over many areas. This resulted in World War II, where Hitler's and Mussolini's military forces were fighting on the same side. This caused fascist parties to die down, so the time period of fascism is from around after World War I ended to when World War II ended, which is 1919 to 1945. Places. The main places involved were Italy and Germany, starting from Mussolini and Hitler respectively. Japan also practiced authoritarianism and fascism and equally disregarded the democratic form of government. In Spain and Portugal, fascist characteristics existed when fascism was around, and in Austria, France, Argentina, South Africa, Libya, and Iraq, only few roots were connected to fascism, but they jump-started the move of neo-fascism. Here is a picture of the Nazi military force fully practicing nationalism. People. Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy, had created the style of government of fascism and military forces fasci coming to power in 1922. Under fascist ideas, communism and democracy were irrelevant, causing the social reforms from fascism and consolidating the power to the government. Maintaining traditional social order enabled Italy to have an inequality of status from the elite. Next, Adolf Hitler, the fascist leader of Germany, had created the Nazi Party, which was essentially nationalism through violence by having a mass genocide of Jews. Single-party dictatorship was established because of him, and policies brought Germany out of depression due to their intense patriotism. Under fascism, it is required that democracy and communism are out of the equation, and war was inevitable, and it was a rather noble experience that a man can have. Additional information. As said before, Japan was very similar to Italy and Germany because of limited democracy, a semi-divine emperor as a fascist leader, and territorial expansion with the help of military force. Later, Japan embraced democracy and modern values by allowing universal male suffrage, political cabinets, expansion of education, and leading to riots and growing movements of radical nationalism.
Now moving on to the beginnings of the Cold War. The Cold War was a period of great tensions between two world superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The two became rivals as they sought to prevent each other from gaining too much power. Unlike other wars, the Cold War itself did not involve actual war between the two sides, although it did lead to other small wars. Before the war, the United States and the Soviet Union originally fought together against the Axis powers in World War II. However, there had always been tensions between the two superpowers. The United States had been cautious of Soviet communism, and they were also concerned about the tyrannical rule of the Russian ruler named Joseph Stalin. The Soviets also had resentments towards the United States. They resented the fact that the Soviet Union was not treated as a legitimate part of the international community by the United States, and they also resented the United States' delayed entry into World War II, because millions of Russians were killed, and the Soviets believed that some of these deaths could have been avoided if the United States had just joined earlier. After World War II, these feelings escalated and turned into mutual hatred and distrust. Like I said before, the two superpowers were trying to keep each other from gaining too much power. Therefore, when the Soviets began to expand after World War II, fear began to build in Americans. Americans feared that the Russians were planning to take control over the entire world. A result of this fear was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is also known as NATO. NATO was formed in 1949 by 12 countries to protect each other from the Soviets. The original NATO members included the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Italy, and more. The Soviet Union and its communist allies formed an organization called the Warsaw Pact, which was very similar to NATO. Many people wonder whether or not the Cold War could have been avoided, but some people say that it was inevitable because of how hostile the atmosphere was between the two superpowers. And because of this hostile environment, no single party was entirely to blame. The war has begun. The entire span of the Cold War lasted from 1947 to 1991, and it began right after World War II. And at the end of World War II, Berlin was divided into four zones, where each zone was controlled by either the United States, France, Britain, or the Soviet Union. Later on, the Western powers decided to bring their zones together. This is when the Soviet Union blocked off road and rail supply routes to the city. The United States and Britain were then forced to deliver supplies by airplane. This was known as the Berlin Airlift. It did not last long, however, because the blockade was lifted a year later. In the following years, many people from East Berlin were trying to move to West Berlin in order to escape control by the Soviet Union. In 1961, the East German government tried to stop this movement by building a wall around West Berlin. This wall was called the Berlin Wall, and it became a great symbol of the Cold War. This is a picture of the Berlin Wall. As you can see, there are people from both East and West Berlin gathered around it, and this picture was actually taken the day after the wall opened. The Cold War did not only occur in Europe, it did extend other places throughout the world. This was due to the Soviet Union supporting other communist governments around the world. At the same time, the United States was trying to stop communism from spreading any further. Both the Korean War and the Vietnam War were a part of this struggle between powers. This concludes our presentation over the beginnings of the Cold War and the rise of fascism, and we hope you guys enjoyed.